seems that it's mostly my co-committee members. But we'll go through, and luckily with all the support from them, if there's anything that I'm missing, I'll be able to hand out and ask them to fill in any of the details that I'm either missing or misspeaking. And so essentially this is an opportunity to go through both our process as a committee, but also to show essentially where we landed in terms of the revised goal and the objectives. Talk a little bit about the conversation we had concerning some of the metrics, some of the KPIs, and there was certainly a significant conversation about how do we measure these things, and then land on the 5 big questions that we sort of identified. Okay, and then talk a little bit about next steps. So, if at any point there's any questions, feel free to jump in. And for my fellow committee members, if I make any mistakes, feel free to throw things at me. Hey, you forgot about this. So, okay, all right. And so let me start with thanking all the committee members. Maybe you folks who are committee members could just stand up real quick and say, I could. That's right. So half the room, and so thank you so much for your support. And I also want to thank Nina Conrad, my administrative assistant, who really organized everything, took notes and all our minutes and stuff like that. She did a great job as well. As our process, we met 5 times in the spring, in January, February, March, and April. And at those meetings, we identified 3 main tasks. We wanted to craft the wording of the Goal 4 and the underlying objectives and sort of carefully think through that wording. We wanted to identify the key performance indicators and ways to measure them. And so there's KPIs, but there's also how you measure the KPIs, right? How do you actually measure these things? And then identify the big questions. And so that essentially was the process that we were looking for. And we, it was, for the most part, the sessions were plenary, and so we were meeting as a committee of the whole. Every once in a while we would break into subcommittees to sort of look at a specific objective and think about the key performance indicators around that. So for the most part we met as a committee of the whole. There were certain times we sort of separated into subcommittees to think about things. The previous version of the goal that we were tasked to revise and think through was this, and it was in the previous strategic plan. It was actually Goal 3, okay? And so the goal said recruit, support, and retain a highly accomplished, high-quality, student-centered, and diverse faculty, staff, administration to achieve university goals and achieve excellence. And so that was the previous goal, okay, that we took under. And as terms of the objectives, we sort of did some inventory work and said, okay, well, where are these objectives? It turns out that there were many versions of this in various places on the web. And so from the Chancellor's website, there were these 3 objectives associated with that goal, okay? Attract and recruit diverse faculty, staff, and administrators, support and retain highly committed faculty, staff, and administrators, and illustrate commitment to students, the university, and the region through faculty, staff, and administrative service and mentoring. That was the objectives on the Chancellor's website. From the strategic plan booklet, there were these 4 objectives associated with that same goal. Okay, I mean they're basically the same notions, but slightly different wording. Okay, and so these were certainly more centrally focused on faculty and staff. Okay, as you can see, and it turns out there was still a third. So we actually got handout materials from the Chancellor to initiate this whole process, and so these were the 4 objectives that came to us directly in written material from the Chancellor. So let's say we had a lot of different starting material, around this, and so we sort of took all of that into consideration as we began to revise our board. Okay, now this is all this stuff, as you remember, the committee members, I handed all this stuff out to you, and so we had a whole big packet of material that we started up with. The very first meeting we came to was essentially because we had sent out the material previous to the meeting. We had emailed out to everybody, and so we actually sort of hit the ground running. And at our very first meeting, we worked on a revised version of the goal itself. Now this took, I think, two meetings or so to actually finalize. But after, and there were some sort of friendly amendments, right, to the wording. We sort of crafted something, a couple of friendly amendments of it. But this is the version, the revised version is what we landed on. Okay. And I welcome input from the committee members around the conversation we had about this. But you know, in terms of, I think it's made it a little bit more concise. You know, highly accomplished and high quality. You know, so you know, high quality and accomplished. If you're high quality and you're accomplished, that seems to satisfy the same idea. Certainly, still student-centered and diverse employees. There was a lot of conversation, and again, I'll ask for committee members to provide input. But we had a lot of conversation about the change from faculty, staff, and administration to employees, and it felt more universal. That, in other words, that we were all in this together.
I like it.
You know, that we're all in this together, and that not to necessarily sort of put us in silos, especially with this. The overall wording of the goal. And so that's what we really came to a consensus around in terms of that wording. And I thought it was a nice change. And then who continually strive for excellence in achieving university goals. So again, it's more actionable. We continually strive for excellence in achieving university goals. So this was the wording that we eventually landed on. Any comments from the committee? Yeah.
Just a little thought about the change to employees. I think another thing that seemed to denote was maybe some understanding of the perception of there being kind of different status, you know, values associated with faculty, staff, administration.
Yeah.
And like you were saying, to kind of establish that it's applicable to everyone who works here, regardless of your role.
Right.
So I thought that was an important part of the conversation for sure.
Yeah, good, please.
I would just say also, when we were looking at faculty, staff, and administration, then there was a bunch of discussion about the order.
Which
So employees, then you don't have to deal with the order issue, because some people thought administration should go first, so that it's like from the top down.
Yeah.
Not that, you know what I mean, the
Yeah.
kind of setting the goal at the top and then working down. And then it's like, well, then, or some people felt faculty should be first, but then should faculty be first or staff? And then, you know, so all
Yeah.
that was kind of discussed. And then it was like, let's just do employees.
Everybody.
That was, now, as you'll see in the wording, as perhaps you recall, in the wording on the objectives, however, we retained that, and then actually had significant discussion about the order, and changed the order on a couple of the objectives precisely to make certain emphasis, you know, and so we'll get to that. But anyway, I think the committee ended up with this version, and I feel it's strongly it's a good version of the goal. Okay, and speaking of objective one, attract and recruit competitively paid and diverse faculty, staff, and administrators. Okay, so this is the first goal, first objective underneath the goal. And in terms of the metrics, the conversation really focused on this objective is to attract and recruit. Okay? So the focus here is attracting and recruiting. And because of that, the committee really felt that it was about compensation. That if you were going to really focus on the things that we need to do better, how do we do better in terms of the compensation package that we put together? Okay, so this really emerged, I think, from the committee. And so clearly there are 3 different comparison groups now. We need to sort of identify the faculty, staff, and administrators, because there are different comparison groups that you need to do. So faculty, senior administrators, and unit directors are comparative data at the national level. Okay. Administrative professional staff should be compared to St. Louis metropolitan data because that's the pool we generally draw from when we're talking about professional staff. And civil service has its own set of salary rules and metrics, I mean, that we have to just simply be aware of. For all groups, competitively paid should be 100% of the median salary for the position in whatever comparison data. And so again, because we're talking about attracting and attracting and recruiting, so much of that attraction and recruitment process is really about the compensation package. And so these were, in some sense, the metrics that we focused on. Any additional comment from anybody in the committee wants to fill in? Okay. Now the second objective focuses on supporting and retaining. So the first objective was attract and recruit, and the second is support and retain. And so again, support and retain diverse, highly qualified, and accomplished faculty, staff, and administrators. And so now that's a different set of things that you're doing. Huh? To support and retain someone is very different from the initial recruitment and attraction to the campus. And so this was, how many different things can we do to do that support? So you're talking about faculty development center workshops. How many classroom management workshops? The faculty on the committee were really talking about things like, how do you handle classroom management? How do you do those kinds of things? Time management and job skills workshops offered to staff and attendance at those workshops. So again, so many of our administrative staff, how do you deal with the time management issues and that sort of thing? Huh? Number of times employee management skill workshops are offered to administrators in attendance. So, again, how are we supporting and retaining the folks who are in management and the things that we're doing to provide them the professional development that they need? Evaluation documents submitted on time by administrators. So is everybody sort of involved in that process, that continuous improvement process and the evaluations that need to happen? And we need to gather some data from a comprehensive campus climate survey because, again, morale is an issue, right? Both at all these levels. And so how do we get that data? Is there a good way to do that? Is the data that we would get from such an instrument robust and something that's actionable? And so all those questions I think emerged. So again, anything from the committee, I'm just giving you a chance to jump in. Okay. All right. So again, the first, attract and recruit. The second, support and retain. Okay. And now, the commitment to student-centeredness, right? And so all faculty, staff, and administrators shall demonstrate the university's commitment to student-centeredness. And so how do you gather data on that? And I'm sure Phil here can talk about the NESI data and how hard it is to get that data and the percentage,
The response rates on NESI they're okay, but we would like them to be better.
Right.
Because the more people that are participating, the more information you have, the better you feel that you've got an accurate measure of what's going on.
Right. Yeah. So, and all of this, and I think any of us who have worked to communicate with students and get responses from students know that it's difficult, right? I mean, where do you go? I mean, it's not clear that they read email.
That's the most charitable thing.
The subtext of that
and then which social media platform are they using today, right? I mean, so it's where, how do you communicate with students? How do you get feedback from them? Finding out the demographics and retention statistics of students, again, broken down demographically so we can isolate the issues that we need to be focusing on. We already talked about the NESI ratings, but how do we track the number of faculty, staff, and administrators who are are mentoring students. You know, I mean, there's so many different versions of mentoring, right? I mean, there's clearly obvious classroom mentoring and student advisement, but how many faculty are the advisors for student groups, right? I mean, working with various student groups in the Kimmel Center. How many faculty are doing travel studies and various things like this, right? I mean, so there's just so many different versions of mentoring, and how do you keep track of all that? Number of students involved in extracurricular and academic development. How many high impact practices are we doing? I know, Elsa, I'm sure you're going to be gathering all kind of data on high impact practices, and how do we track that data? Student satisfaction. I know in CAS we did a complete reorganization of our advising office, and actually changed completely the way we get feedback from students in terms of student satisfaction. As opposed to sending out an email and hoping for a response, we actually hand them a piece of paper as they walk out, and then have them apply. You can go here and fill this out. Put it in that box right there. And so our response rate went up by 2 orders of magnitude. And then student satisfaction, again, with facilities and student services, all the different things, right? So how do you track that, and how do you gather that data that's again faithful and actionable? So good. Yeah, please do.
I would say, one of the things I think I recall from our conversation about this is, trying to capture information about maybe the functions of the university that are kind of invisible to students, but still essential to our, the overall operation of the university. And so not only getting information about how students would, perceive that, but okay, is there a way that we are kind of shaping the approach to that work that might be less connected to everyday student activities, but still kind of keeping that focus on the mission of teaching students and having it be student-centered, even if it's not directly interactive with students.
No, that's true. In a certain sense, no matter what we are doing at the university, it has an impact on students, right?
Absolutely.
And so, all the way from the folks who are making the grounds as beautiful as they are to the folks who are making sure that financial aid is happening. I mean, just when you think about it, in essence, it's all about the students. And so finding, again, like you said, Jamie, those hidden things, right? The invisible student-centeredness, and how do you track that? Okay, objective 4. Notice the change in the order. So cultivate administrators, staff, and faculty who practice openness, respect, equity, and justice for persons of different backgrounds, cultures, and perspectives. And as I recall, the conversation of the committee really wanted to focus on administration. And the fact that we put administration first in this was that there's a heightened responsibility in upper administration to ensure that these values of openness, respect, equity, and justice are at the forefront of what we do as an institution. And so there was considerable conversation about the fact that we wanted administrators to go first in this. But again, the metrics, assessing and tracking outcomes that address diversity-related issues for continuous improvement, compiling data and lists of the type of activities ongoing on campus, including but not limited to the various things like the annual diversity report, diversity day, diversity summit, access program activities and support, but certainly the work that the Center for Student Diversity and Inclusion activities happens, SASON activities, the St. Louis and Metro East Pride events. So there was really the subcommittee that worked on these metrics focused more on events. How do we have these events, and how do we track who's participating in events, and if the events are doing what we need to. And so that's what they focused on. Any input from the committee on this? Okay. There is another group of folks who are working on the KPIs, the key performance indicators. And we recently got an email from the Chancellor's office to talk about this other list. So I think, also is this the Quality Council is kind of looking at this?
Yeah.
Okay. And so I think they've identified some key things. And these seem to be some on that list that we really didn't focus on in our committee. So I'm just putting them as other metrics. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about that process.
So, as a matter of fact, the task of the University Quality Council will be based upon the summaries of the strategical working groups, is to identify those KPIs and then set the benchmark levels based upon understanding of the process that has led to this point.
Okay, yeah.
So this is helpful.
Okay,
Add
good.
those in because they might find a match towards other, or overlap with other strategic goals.
Yeah. And I know one thing that emerged, well, I'll talk a little bit about what happened and where I've already briefed this, but one thing that has emerged was feedback that there wasn't really a focus anywhere in terms of research and research productivity. That there wasn't necessarily, it kind of got lost in terms of, well, where do we put this? And I know Jerry Weinberg, for obvious reasons, said that, well, shouldn't this be explicit somewhere? And so I don't know what's going to happen with that, but I know that was actually some specific feedback from Jerry Weinberg in his role as dean of graduate school and associate, provost for research. And so it's like, well, where do we make it explicit? That this is part of what we do as an institution. We produce creativity and research. And so how do we do that? But also things like the faculty staff retention data. I mean, really, how are we retaining faculty that we have here, staff? How much turnover is there? I know in the CAS advising office we've had significant turnover. Right? I mean, this is probably the case in advising across campus and advising staff. And so how do we handle this? So P&T success rates, creating career ladder opportunities. Is that one way to address staff turnover? I mean, having career ladder opportunities for staff, and then again, some measure of faculty staff internal promotion rate. How do you, our staff who want to advance in their careers, are they given an opportunity on this campus to be able to do that? And how do we track that success so that they're able to do that? So, again, these were other metrics. We didn't explicitly talk about those in our committee, but these have emerged from other conversations. These were the big questions that we ended up with. And so, in terms of the 5 big questions, what are the most important recruiting and retention initiatives, including comparative and competitive salary figures, and how do we modify our hiring initiative strategies to become more effective in attracting more diverse and highly qualified individuals? So, what is it that we're doing well? What is it that we need to improve on in terms of our recruitment strategies for both faculty and staff? And so I think that's a big question. How do we develop a focused effort to create an improved working environment and improve morale? It's like, what can we do to actually improve those things? How can we enhance professional development to include mentoring and training of our workforce? I know in terms of faculty and staff, how the whole onboarding procedure, how do we I've got a new staff member starting next Monday. I'm thinking, well, what steps do I do to bring that person on and sort of, we talk about drinking out of a fire hose, right? I mean, you sort of sit them down and just sort of shoot information out, that's, how do we, right? I mean, you probably feel that way.
Right at this moment.
What's an intelligent onboarding procedure that really, in some sense, provides some scaffolding so that, it doesn't have to happen overnight, right? It doesn't have to happen overnight, but at some point, they have the support, the information they need to be successful in their career. How do we determine the effectiveness of the professional development opportunities we do offer to faculty and staff administration? I mean, it's not like we're not doing professional development opportunities, but how effective are they? And how do we track them? And how do our tenure and promotion expectations for our faculty and staff development opportunities align with our vision and mission? And this was the one place that, so at the, as I'll say in a moment, at the extended Chancellor's Council retreat this summer, I presented this. All the committees presented, the chairs of the committees presented. And so when they said, well, where's research? They pushed back, where's research? I said, it's in here. That's where it is. It's right there. So again, but to be honest, this conversation, this campus conversation we're going to have about what our current Carnegie classification is, right? Doctoral professional, and are we going to move to R2, right? That conversation, which I think is incredibly important. What implications does it have for our tenure and promotion processes? Because R2 institutions have different research expectations of their faculty. And how is that going to affect our promotion and tenure processes and our expectations?
I'm going to push back a little bit, Chris.
Yeah.
Because I think there's an assumption there that I don't think is necessarily true.
Okay.
We could be in R2 by expanding our EDD program.
Yes.
That's all we have to do.
Right.
We don't have to change anything else, and we would be reclassified as an R2.
Right.
So I just want to be careful because I do think there's some expectations. Well, if we go R2, well, we have to do this, we have to do this, we have to do this. No, we choose how to develop this and how far we go.
Yeah.
And so I'm sensitive to that.
I appreciate that. And I sense your sensitivity.
That's a first.
But let me re-push back. And say, so yes, we can by simply changing the numbers on our EDD program, we can become R2. However, if we want to be compared to, if we don't want to simply be at the bottom rung of R2, right? If we want to, in some sense, create a different level of peer group, then a different level of research productivity and external grant productivity, and all that has to be part of the conversation.
And probably a couple of more PhD programs.
Yes, and a couple more PhD programs, yeah. And so
That's far.
I don't know. We're in the same ball. All right, but anyway, so I do think that at least part of that, those tenure and promotion expectations will have to be part of the conversation of that change to R2 if it does in fact happen. Next steps, like I said, that work from the committee was presented at extended Chancellor's Council retreat this summer. So I just, along with the other committee chairs, I presented the work. Feedback from these rollout sessions, I assume we're gonna sort of incorporate that, and certainly will inform, I think, the council work that else is doing. And as I had heard that you were working with the University Quality Council to determine the focus of the KPIs, and so that seems to be where we are next. And then I think we're trying to finish this by the end of the semester. Maybe not. Maybe
Is that
not.
fire hose?
The fire hose. Okay. Depends on the flow of the fire hose.
That's ideal situation,
Yeah.
but we have to be realistic about the cycle of meetings that we have as well.
Sure.
Because the University Quality Council is also involved in work on the quality initiative for HLC.
Oh.
The two processes become parallel and work with similar timelines.
Yeah, sure.
So
Right.
alignment, but also chasing each other, meeting these expectations of completion.
Yeah. So then if by the end of the academic year,
Yes,
then
yes.
thanks for your time and attention. Are there any questions, comments? Yes, please.
Okay, for recruitment and retention from a millennial Gen Zer standpoint, trying to compete with the private industry and trying to, retain and attract the top talent.
Sure.
Has the university looked at all about, for the private industries, moving into one of the benefits of flex time, working from home? I understand that, that's not a total thing, but, your university's pretty strict, 8 to 4:30, and the units that could do that, is that something the university's gravitating towards to help attract those people looking for those benefits? Or is it just compensation?
We did not talk much about flex time. I have to admit, I don't recall talking about that. And if we are gravitating toward that, I think the gravitational coefficient is pretty small. I don't think there's much conversation about that. But that's a great point. I mean, it is one of the things I know that in the industry folks are working toward.
I see that from my peers, that's
Yeah.
a big benefit. And
Yeah.
I see the generations here working on campus and
Yeah.
millennials and Gen Zers, you need to start bringing those people in, and that's one of the big things that they look for. So
Yeah.
I'm just curious on what the university wants in that
Yeah,
conversation.
no, that's a good point. It's a good comment. I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. Very good. Anything else?
I did appreciate the onboarding and the career ladder. I think that turnover has been a huge issue for my office, and those are two things that I think are just crucial and I think are lacking. So I appreciate hearing those have already been embedded and thought about. So.
Are they going to other places on campus, or are they leaving the
They're
university?
leaving because there's nowhere for them to go here. So advisors, there's nowhere else for them to go unless I quit and take my job. But there's only so many of my jobs on campus.
Well, and that's.
So there's no upward movement, and we pay at the bottom of the scale compared to our peers in the region. So they go across the river and easily make $10,000.
Because I don't see that as a university issue, maybe in particular areas.
I think it's specific to advising, because we require a master's and we're tied in on salary, and we have no flexibility with salary at all. So, for example, I just hired an advisor with 10 years experience, and I had to start him at the exact same level as a brand new professional. So there was no way to compensate for that 10 years of knowledge that he is already bringing to the university. So,
The same is true for our full-time NTT instructors,
Yes.
to be honest.
Yes.
Basically, you're an NTT instructor, you're an NTT instructor, And so I think there's, I think there's movement in that direction, but it's certainly an issue that the campus is aware of.
because it does impact students. I mean, what our students have had, they're in certain areas, you potentially could have 4 different advisors last year, and that's just too many for a student to have.
Yeah, that was actually one of the student comments we got most often was the turnover of advisors, and every time I came in, I had a new advisor, so very good. Any other comments or questions? Yeah, Melissa?
Did you have a discussion with your group about looking into some of the more kind of common measures, indices about best place to work and what is being considered as a indicator of satisfaction among staff, faculty, administrators, and other institutions of higher learning, especially in the region? I know there's some of those rankings going around, and I think it will be curious to see what exactly do they consider as determining factors, and if there's metrics that could be adopted from these indices as a means of recruitment and retention tools for all the 3 groups that you're referring, and really employees at the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean, we certainly had a significant conversation about how best to sort of try to measure those
Yeah.
things. I don't know if we identified a specific instrument or way to do it. I mean, in many of these cases, and of course, I think Phil could talk to some of this. It's like how do you gather the data?
Yes,
You could actually say, well, this is the data we need to gather, right?
Yes.
We could, right? But then the question is, well, how do you do that? right? I mean, so, you know, how do you actually end up gathering that data? How do you get how do you get a good instrument?
Yeah.
And how do you get the kind of response rate that you need to get data that's robust you can count on?
Yeah.
So we do the Harry.
Sorry. I see the tenor of this committee. She can't stop laughing.
The Harry survey for faculty.
Right.
Yeah.
Will be doing this spring. And that does have indicators of how faculty at least feel about a lot of different aspects of their job and compensation and benefits. And we generally have done pretty well on that. It'll be interesting to see this spring if there's been a big change.
Yeah. Yeah, but perhaps a similar thing for professional staff and folks, right?
We don't have anything like that that I
Yeah.
know for civil service or administrative professionals.
Yeah, yeah. And like I said, I mean, you probably know what data we need to collect, but how do you do it and where do you collect it? Yeah, please.
So along those lines, just so you're aware, I don't know if you're aware or not, but I'm civil service and our union sent out an email asking us what our priorities are for the new contract. So there are things like that out there, just getting that information.
I would, something along the lines of that, like, so once the Harry study's done, then like for faculty recruitment, because I go out to these things and I talk about our wonderful benefits and wonderful campus and wonderful environment, but am I missing something?
Right.
You know, I don't hear from the faculty, you know, other than posting, but am I missing something that I should be focusing on other than that? Because we get a lot of people, they don't care about benefits, they're on a spouse's benefits, they don't care. What else can you offer me? And knowing what else can we offer, you know, other than these other things, that's really helpful with recruitment too.
Sure.
Such.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments? One more thanks to my fellow committee members for a job well done. I think we checked off our box. And so thanks for everybody else for coming and